show that goes into detail of all the techniques, tools and fabrics that come up on the Great British Sewing Bee. We do that because we have time, and we also are able to do that because we have master tailor and couturier Carol Lane here helping us along the way. Hey, Carol.
Hi, Stuart. How are we doing?
I'm doing very well. I'm all jubileed out.
So I think we all are, but it was fun.
It was all
absolutely very wonderful. Good fun. And I like just having an alternate week, you know. Just
yes.
4 days of different was nice.
Indeed. So we're recording a bit later than normal, but I think we're allowed that actually, aren't we? For the Queen.
It is, exactly. And it was nice to see such a big production because we saw a lot of things on film.
Yeah.
On stage, TV.
Absolutely.
And that, for me, tied right into what I wanted to talk about after we saw week 6. And that was, you know, sewing clothes to show off.
Yes. And that came up many times, didn't it? We had the Parker, but for the pattern challenge, but certainly for round 2, the transformation challenge, which was specifically to make a stage outfit for a country music star. And then the made to measure was making a outfit inspired by Bowie. And we know how theatrical many of his costumes were. So it's really all about the fabrics this session, isn't it?
I thought it was straightforward this week. Yes, absolutely. Because when you're talking about, say, David Bowie, you know, and he changed so many times, he reinvented his persona on stage so often, you know, whereas the country music scene, that's certain things come to mind when you think about that, but it's always, you know, what's happening on stage, and you think about sight lines and lighting and the audience perspective and who else is on stage and the colors and what happens, you know, with the arena that you're in. So there's a lot of things to think about. And then we have to ask the fabric to live up to that, you know, to fill the space.
So let's talk then about fabrics. From that point of view, from your experience, is there a fabric that you know that's always going to look good on stage or on TV? And are there fabrics where you go, oh, no, we best not use that? Is there anything like that that comes to mind?
Yes, I would say definitely it depends on the production. If you're looking for something tailored, sculptured, something that's going to hold itself together, then you're looking at the taffetas, the dupions, because they're iridescent and they have a very strong weave. They hold a posture. They look like they're full of air. So those are reliable, and we've used those a lot. Beaded fabrics are also really striking on stage, and they speak and they ricochet light all over the place, but they can be very heavy and they can be very drapey, more fluid. So you have to either cope with that in like a cylindrical sculpture, because they're not going to proof out, or you have to reinforce them and build some architecture into it. You said, are there any fabrics you wouldn't use? And I would say anything that was, you know, matte, you know, dull in appearance, fabric that, you know, just, you know, you can't do too much. You know, cotton is not, cotton polyester fabrics like that woven, they don't live up to the grandeur of the stage, that you'd make a summer frock out of it. But you're really looking for something which is bespangled, you know, and has some iridescence and holds a rich color, you know, against all the lighting and everything else.
Do you have to do a lot of research if you were making a certain specific costume?
I think it's always about researching a story. Let's say if it's an opera, a staged opera, you might want to put some of the influence in about the story, and then also researching the venue. How big is the stage, or is it going to be filmed? Where is this going out to? Are there any cultural restrictions? Are there any, you know, we're going to talk about fur and leather. Okay, well, those are fabrics, there's a bit of controversy about those. So, but if I'm doing a project which is restoration, and I have a garment which is 40, 50 years old, and that garment was very much a part of the dress of the day, you know, it's a different job for me to tackle.
Yeah.
You know, I have to kind of divorce myself from those other controversies. So yes, there is a lot to think about.
Yeah, and then of course, I'm just thinking now, with my experience of theatre as well, of people to talk to. So as you say, the lighting team, what lights are going to be used? Is it going to be heavily lit? Is it going to be stylistically lit? I saw Batman, the new Batman, on the film last night, not at the cinema, but on Sky. And it was wonderfully dark, very much like the old proper comic book sort of noir style.
Yes.
But it had a lovely tint to it. It was black, dark, and an orange tint all the way. So costumes must have been thought about, or even like the props thought about, on how they would reflect, and does it fit in with that tonal orange look?
Sure. Yes, absolutely.
So you've got loads of people to then have to converse with and talk with, to take those concepts in and how that will hit the fabric. Yes,
and also a lot of these celebrations or stage plays. I remember working on Les Miserables. Well, this is a huge costume challenge, and fast costume changes, and very stressed fabrics. And all these costumes will be shown in a production. They'll be worn, every single night, and then for matinees, and they all go on a truck, and then they go to another city, and then that production is put on again and again and again. It's hugely costly because you have a lot of development, with the fabric research, and you're dyeing the fabrics or stressing the fabrics, and then you've got a whole team of specialist technicians, sewing on massive poppers and big pieces of Velcro to make them very sturdy. Huge hook and bars, for example. So you're talking about long-term life. But also, if another creative director comes on the scene and they want to do something maybe different, because people have seen the production over and over again.
Yes.
So there's a challenge there.
Yeah.
To breathe some new light into it.
And I suppose there's a big difference between theatre and TV, because actually, as a costume designer, do you have to think, well, that's not going to be seen right at the back either. So
True.
do you skip detail, or do you choose different fabrics because it's not going to be seen? Or whereas TV, you can have close-ups, so you can't.
That's right.
On that detail, can you?
I mean, you've hit it right on the head. You can't do a close-up in the theater. And depending on the lighting, and they use this to dramatic effect as well. They pick a cloth that, when they're out of shot, you can't see the fabric. When as soon as they're lit, then it really, it's very noticeable. And so, and this is all comes under the design team. People that have theatrical degrees that know a lot about lighting and staging and things like that. So lots to talk about, and it all goes in the pot, and then then it has to be put together.
Well, and as you said at the beginning, there are so many different types of fabric. So let's go into our first fabric chat with you, where you show us just an array of possible fabrics that you could use and how they would perhaps appear on stage and screen. Let's take a look.
Today, I want to talk about some of the challenges you face working with trickier fabrics that are embellished or have beads or sequins or embroidery. And on my cutting table today, I have a selection of garments that I'm working on at the moment. Some are bespoke, some are restoration projects, and some are collaborations with TV and stage companies. So let's just have a look at some of them. Here we have a flat sequence, which is fixed onto a stretch tool. Here we have some more flat sequence, which is in a sheer presentation. Here we have a pleated fabric. Now, this is interesting because you see it has this little dotted Swiss effect on it over tulle, and it's pleated on the cross grain. You can see the salvage here. One of the salvage edges is quite finished. The other salvage edge has a different finish on it, and it kind of disappears into the disappears without that border edge on it. Here we have some Dupion silks and some brocade. This is a synthetic brocade. These are silks. Here we have some fur. We've got some feathers. We've got a few boas here. And I can show you a few tricks about how to sew those on both by hand or by machine. Here is some silk chiffon, very delicate, with a slight pleated grain to it. Here we have a 4-way stretch, which is actually a swimwear fabric that I'm going to be working with in the next couple of weeks. So we have to talk about how to stabilize that. And then a selection here of silks. So here we have a crepe de chine, which is a really nice fabric to work with because it's quite stable on both the straight and the cross grains. But I'm going to be teaming it up with a silk satin, and this has a different kind of fluidity and effect. So you can imagine this under stage lighting. It just looks glorious. Underneath these 2 layers, of course, we're going to use a cupra lining. Why viscose? It's a synthetic fabric, but it's perfect because it has a nice cool temperature, it does not generate heat, and it's breathable. So combining silks and synthetics. Here we have an ombre. Again, this is a synthetic fabric, and it goes from kind of a pink to a peachy and then to the violet spectrum. And that has great effect on the stage. Here we have a lurex, a metallic fabric that has a metallic thread knitted in. So some of the things that you have to worry about with this is that it tends to curl and it needs stabilizing. And down here I have just a remnant of fabric that I'm working with now, just finishing off an Elizabethan bridal gown. And you can see how this particular fabric pleats and works beautifully and holds a posture. So here I have a strap, a shoulder strap, which was sewn in a large 1.5-inch rouleau, and I've pressed the seam off the edge to the inside, and then I've secured it with a double stitch over a linen tape for stability and the long-term life you need.
Wonderful. So loads of fabrics there, some exquisite fabrics, but ones that I can relate to a lot from my experience of being head of drama and teaching lots are the satins, the shimmeries, and the feathers, and the beaded, the sequins. You could have sequins in theatre all the time, aren't you?
Yes, and all over the floor.
Oh.
All over the floor. You got to be so careful with that cloth, don't you? You know, because I'm sure you've seen the remnants raining all over the stage.
Absolutely. But when you picked up that satin, and it just, you can see how it hit, that was the red or the orangey satin there.
Yes. So you had the crepe de chine, which is more matte, and then the silk satin. Those two are going to be merged together in a design. And yes, the light loves that, doesn't it? And the fluidity of it, and just a twirl from an actor or a singer, and it just takes flight. That kind of fabric.
I remember having big costume numbers with chorus. In a pantomime, you obviously you've got the wonderful theatrical costumes of the dame, which might have, you know, big, huge sort of a nice little bodice, but then a huge sort of bottom dress with tulle underneath and some sort of sequins and a style. But then you'd have these big chorus numbers of 30 young students, all in a solid colour, or a colour t-shirt and a lovely silk satin skirt. And you can imagine all these big dance numbers with that bold colour.
Yeah, yes. And all the movement that creates, you know, because you're not just sitting there standing still, are you? You're moving about and you're bringing these fabrics to life, and they, you know, get some air into them. And I would love to see something like that, actually.
It reminds me of the classic numbers you get. I remember seeing Crazy for You. I love that musical, which was all of George Gershwin, with the Gershwin music. And of course, it was like MGM Grand style. So it was big, you know, these big, huge feathers that they would.
Oh, do. Yes. And the fans and the big skirts.
Yes. and quite skimpy costumes as well. But that, you know, when they had these big numbers, like I've got rhythm, isn't it? I've got music, and they would have these tops with just, you know, bra pieces. I don't know what you call them.
Yes, yeah,
Ooh,
very skimpy, and a lot of maybe a tulle underneath, you know, holding it all together. But the chorus line, everybody dressed the same.
That's it, the chorus line. That's the name. Yeah.
Yeah, and doing the same maneuvers, and coming down these great stairways.
Yes.
And floating across the stage.
I love it.
All that purity and function. Yeah. Great.
I know you're in America, and America's a very big place, but there's something I've always wanted to do in New York. Are they called the Rockettes?
Is it the Rockettes? Yes. The Rockettes, yes.
I would love to see them, because I'm a big tap dance fan, and seeing however many 30 ladies doing the tapping and the legs.
Yes.
Phenomenal.
And the fan kicks, you know, straight, almost the splits,
But their costumes are quite tight fitted, like waistcoats or even maybe like or stretch. You showed some of that on the video. You're doing a future project, didn't you say, with that?
I'm going to do a swimwear line for one of my a new startup. And so I'm starting to work with it now, and it is 4-way stretch, which is it's all kind of all over the place. And all the pieces are quite skimpy. So you got smaller, you got these smaller sections, and you have to reinforce them and keep the fabric in tow, you know, keep the garment on the body as well. And it's very springy. So if you just have a little halter and you just tie it in a bow, well, you know, a bit of movement and that starts to come undone. So I'm learning something new here.
Good luck with that. Let's go back to the sequins then, because I know even from that first video, we saw a couple of different, you had the sequins that were in a nice straight line, and then you had the classic sequins where the beads where they're all over the place. But you're going to explain how to use that or how to work with it, aren't you? I'm going
to show you just a few tricks to make life easier for yourself when you're working with beaded fabrics. And you can have all over beaded with flat sequins. That will go through the machine quite easily.
Oh, okay.
If you have all over beaded with bugle beads, you know, there's no chance. And I do explain in this tutorial that I don't ever use that hammer option, you know, where you hammer out things that are in the seam allowance, because it's dangerous. You've got glass shards flying all over the place.
Okay.
You need protective eyewear to do that. And I just think it's a mess. It just makes a mess. So I'm going to show you another way where you don't have that.
Fabulous. Right, well, there we are. Let's go into our little video number 2 of Carol explaining all about the beading and how to cope with that. Here we go.
So let's just quickly look at 3 different types of beaded fabric that I have on hand here. The first one, because it's sewn in parallel rolls, you could probably get away with cutting a very straight design, very few pieces, not too complicated, and then you can machine it by using a zipper foot and then just using the space between these lines. So that might work out very well. Something else to worry about when you're working with beaded lace is that when you put the right sides together to sew your garment, you do risk beads catching on each other. So the trick I like to use is to just put a few pieces of tissue paper between your work once you get everything cut, and then you can sew your seam and then just peel away the tissue paper when you're done. Another quick trick, if you don't have an all-over beaded pattern, here's a small little bodice. And if you decided that you wanted your placement to be, say, something like this, well, you've got, looking at your seam lines here now, you've got very close to the seam edge, you've got some sequins and a few short bugle beads. You also have them down here at the waistline. So you can carefully remove these with a pair of pointed scissors and a tweezer. And then when you do that, make sure that on the underside that you secure any threads that you've disturbed. So as you can see, here's one of your threads. There's one of your threads there that connects the beads. So you have to be very careful to re-tie those off. Okay. And then finally, here is my next project. This is a magnificent piece of beaded, all over beaded fabric, which has a combination of 3D embroidery and 3D use of fabric. Here's a corresponding chiffon. And it also has this beautiful scalloped edge. And on the underside, you can see how this is all put together with this meandering thread that actually has great order, even though it doesn't look like it, because they're working in patches. A lot of people tell you to set this up, look at your seam line, and get a hammer and pound the beads away, and I never do that. I don't like that technique. It's dangerous. It puts shards of glass everywhere. You risk, because you're chopping a bead, you do risk that sharp edge cutting a thread. It can happen. And your studio is going to be a mess with particles of glass. So what I do is I take my fabric and I finish off the edge either with a hand overcast, or you can use a fray check, a glue, and then I sew my seam in a careful back stitch, double thread that's waxed, and then there is my seam. It's all finished. I haven't pounded anything out, and there's no bits of shard glass laying around, and there's a nice seam, which now you can take your finished edge, and if you wanted to do a very delicate zigzag pick-up stitch, you can pick up some of the threads or even some of the beads to make it very sturdy. And there's nothing wrong with that. This is the technique that I like to use. So there we are. There's a few tips on how to control beaded fabrics.
Well, who would have known that you used tissue paper then?
Oh, it does save a lot of untangling, believe me.
Wow. Yes. Well, I'm just trying to think of the amount of hours that you would have spent doing all that intricacy with theatrical costumes.
Yes, that's right. And sometimes when you get these garments together and you've got your seam line, but then you have missing beads, and so you have to go back and fill in, what you're missing in the pattern. And a lot of garments are designed sort of, the pattern is designed an inch inside your seam allowance.
Right.
So you sew everything together happily, but then when you press the seam out, you may have 2 inches, an inch on either side of the seam, and then you've got to join the patterns together. They do that on purpose so that it's just easier, and you save time in the end.
Do you, come on, give us the truth now. If you get a project where you got something that heavily beaded, do you go, oh no? or do you go, well, this is a real challenge? Because I know with every job, we get things in our job where we just go, oh, not again, or not this. And you kind of, because you know how hard it's going to be. But at the end of it, it's always wonderful. But do you get something like that at times where your heart just goes, oh?
Stuart, it depends what you've just come out of.
Right.
And if you've had a lot of work on and your eyes are tired and there's been a lot of stress and you're just knackered.
Yeah.
Then a big beaded project like that is you're gonna have to take a few days off first. But if you've had an easy run of things and then it's when you just get the goose flesh, yes, I'll take this off. And you just hope that the design has some draping in it and very few pieces, just blocks of shapes that you can easily put together. Because you can do anything with beaded fabric. You mustn't be, frightened of it. It's just, there's a way to do things, and there's some advice out there which is not particularly helpful. And I would say almost treat it like any other fabric.
Oh, right.
But you may not, you may have to ditch the sewing machine. You just may have to wax some thread and just do the whole thing by hand.
Yeah, and you did say that on the video, actually, hand sewn with double thread and waxed. And we always said, though, even though that you tend to think that doing it by hand is going to be a lot more time, but actually it's probably a lot more, we've always said this, not therapeutic, but when you're there and you're hand sewing it, there's something quite beautiful about that process, away from the noise of the machine and the stress of trying to put it all through. That it must be, from that point of view, something quite nice, spiritual. That's the word.
You bring up a great point there. You do, because it's that you get the rhythm and it's yours. It's in your own hands, and you do make a lot of progress quickly. You lay this out on a flat surface, and you're at a good chair height.
Yeah.
You've got 3 or 4 sections of thread that you've prepared and you've waxed, enough to get you through. Maybe it's a long dress with an underarm to waist seam. It might be a meter 20, a meter 30. Well, it sounds like a big span, but it's not. You actually make tracks pretty quickly. And think about this as well. You're putting in an invisible zip in a beaded fabric, and you're doing it by hand. You can actually match everything up perfectly because you can ease it in as you go. It's just easier than battling with the machine.
Manageable. Absolutely. Yeah. And then in the long term, you might have gone wrong a few times on the machine, or you pull it out and you go, oh, it's moved, the feed dogs have moved it. You then got to rip it out and do it again. Whereas actually that hand process, you haven't. You've got it right as you've been going, haven't you?
Yeah, every step of the way. Yeah. And you can set up your pins, and then there's nothing battling, and you can set it up a little bit higher. You can put the work up on a sleeve board, so it's closer to you, and your hands or elbows are resting on something. You're incredibly comfortable.
Yeah.
And just inch by inch, you get it done.
Yes. Let's go into our last little video where you talk to us in a bit more detail about fur and suede. We talked about this earlier. If you're doing a certain production, you might need to use fur if you are trying to do it as realistically or faithfully as possible. And I know that does come with some controversy about using it. But you talk about how to cut into it and how to deal with it by going through the back. So let's take a look at this video of Carol explaining fur and suede. Oh, and those good old feathers, which we're going to come to in a minute.
Here they come.
If you're working with fur or suede, you're going to have a selection of skins to work with from which you cut your original pieces. So if you're making a fur coat, you're going to have sleeves, collar, you're going to have a forepart, and you're going to have a back. And you would never cut fur from the top. Now, I'm going to talk about this using this piece, which is a restoration project, and this is a fur stole. Now, to prepare the fur stole, what they've done is they've put this interlining, this padded interlining, on the skin side down before they applied their lining. So if this was an original piece of fabric, what you would do to cut your shapes is you would make, working from the underside, from the skin side, you would make a small hole, and then you would cut your shape just from the skin, keeping the fur away. So you would just cut this layer here. Otherwise, you can imagine, if you just cut this, you would just have fur everywhere and you would really mess up the grain. Well, the same principle holds for suede. Always work from the underside. Chalk out or use a pencil line to denote your shapes, and then using a seam ripper or a small knife, carefully cut, lifting the skin away from the fur. Then when you're going to sew a seam, you use the same principle, where you would fold along the seam line, and in this case you're going to have to be working with very small seams, say 1/8 or slightly larger. You pin the fur together, working from the skin side, and then make sure that on the underside your fur is not caught up in there to the best that you can. Then you would sew your seam, and then when the seam is all finished and you turn the work around, then you can pick the fur back out of that seam to the point where you shouldn't be able to see it at all. And just a quick word about feathers. Right, now we have a couple of boas here, an ostrich and one with a mixed feather. And you can feel that there's a core in the middle of this. Okay, where all the feathers are wrapped together. You can feel this cord, and what you can do let's get a piece of Dupion. When you lay this on your fabric, you can pin it across the core, arranging your feathers, and then working from the underside. You can see that core there. You can just put a set of hand stitches, just a loose tack there, and that will work very well. You can also put these things in the machine and sew a zigzag on them. It's a bit trickier, but you can do it. If you don't want to use the hand method, you can put it in the machine and do a very large zigzag stitch, wide and long. But by all means, practice first. Set up a few trials so that you get the effect you want.
There we are. Who would have thought, that idea about fur? But it makes complete sense, because if you cut it from the front, you're going to be covered, aren't you?
Yes, exactly. And then you can't get those even fibers back in. You sew your seam, and then you can't unpick them because you've cut some of them on a steep angle. Hair grows in all different directions, but just working from the underside, you can see how much easier. I wish I had a better example of fur to use, but I just had that one restoration.
But feathers, and those ostrich feathers got mind of their own, haven't they?
Oh, those are panto, aren't they?
Yes, so good. Good old Ting from the other video. He was always the Dane in our school pantos, because there is something quite special about having a teacher as a character and having the younger students perform with the teacher and rehearse together and have that show process together. And it's something always magical. And with him as the Dane, he was just brilliant. And we'd always have him in something satiny or sparkly with sequins or some feathers, big feathers round the neck, or some sort of, what do you call it, a boa?
Yeah, the boa.
You can do it on the machine, but is that, and again, in this case, is it easier just to whip that round with a hand stitch?
Oh, totally. Get yourself out working on a flat surface. It's the same thing. You make such steady progress, and you can see what you're doing, and in a different way than trying to manage it. And some of these, the contestants in the bee are working on a free arm machine.
Yeah.
The work is in their lap, and then they have to go up to the free arm, and then it goes back down the machine. And you kind of wish they had a nice flat surface to sew on, don't you?
That can stretch the fabric, can't it? Or you have to battle holding the fabric up so it goes through easier. And then you're one hand less, aren't you? Because you're holding the fabric. So how Jill copes is amazing.
Oh, hats off to her. And you're trying to balance fabric, and when you're doing that, it affects how fast you can go.
Yeah.
And speed in this competition is crucial.
Yeah, that was wonderful, Carol, talking about fabrics. We don't often do it enough, because sometimes we get so caught up in a particular technique, whereas actually it's nice to stand back and talk about the basics of fabric. Really, really enjoyed that. So let's talk about then how they coped with these fabrics, and that idea of stage worthy, or making something with visual impact over the next 3 challenges, because there aren't many sewers left to talk about now, are there? So the Parker. 1960s, it's Music Week, don't forget, so it's based on those mods and rockers, isn't it? The Parker, that was a hard challenge, wasn't it?
That was insane, actually, to have that thrown at them, and 4.5 hours to do it. And I know that we've talked about symmetry. Well, that's not going to help you in a challenge like this, because a lot of the construction is set at one side, and that's where you have to be very careful about right side and wrong side, and left forepart and right forepart. And I would imagine it looked like your typical new pattern that was printed to save paper and didn't have a comprehensive set of directions on it, because I could sense that a lot of people were having a lot of trouble. I mean, even Patrick, when he was setting it up, it's like, what am I doing here? You can tell. Very, very tricky. It's all flat. It's all flat work. The pockets are flat.
Yeah.
The zip guard, the overflap, everything is from that point of view, it was straightforward. But a lot of hidden, mechanisms in it.
Yes, all those chords in there.
Yeah, very, very tricky.
Amazing. Full credit to Allsewers really for what they made. The order, Jill was bottom because of the fabric. Now she made a beeline for that fabric straight away. She clearly saw that, was inspired by that camo, but it had was it like oilcloth? It had a shiny finish to it.
Yeah, I think it had some kind of a backing. Did it have a waterproof or water repellent something underneath?
Yes.
I think the camo fabric is really inviting, and you think, yes, that I can see that. You can see it finish. It looked really good. But she needed to work with tissue and a walking foot. And, so big hurdle there with that fabric.
Angela 6th, Mani 5th, Debra 4th, then the top 3, Annie 3rd, Christian 2nd, with his white with grey pockets.
Like that very much. Yes. That worked out really well. It's just that one slip up with getting the channel, the waist channel, not in the right position, so overlapped.
And then Brogan, who breezed through that. They were cutting away to everyone running around. How do you do this? How do you do that? Everyone was helping each other with the zip and putting it there, and which is the facing, and then Brogan was just like, do you think that's the teacher in her, or she's just a very skilled sewer?
No, I think it's a combination. She's a very good sewer, but I think she has that kind of a mathematical brain where she can work things out. I think we talked about natural engineer.
Absolutely.
And I think she's got that. I think she has that quality very strong. And when I saw that parka, I thought, well, if the weight of this is on the pattern challenge, there's your winner.
Without doubt.
Hands down.
Yeah.
Because
she was just so confident. She read the instructions, she did it, she read the instructions, did it. And I think there was one bit, she said, well, hopefully this will be in. She went, boom, oh, perfect. And you just felt,
it's worked, yes. Yeah, she's fearless, not afraid of anything. And so at that point I thought, oh yes, if it was just on the pattern, she would just fly away with the trophy. But we'll see how the weight of all this is on the more imaginative challenge and late to movement.
Let's move on to the transformation challenge, which was, I like this, denim and shorts, 90 minutes to turn into a stage outfit for a country music star. So again, it's coming down to visual impact. How are you going to take denim and shirts, and obviously they could go into the haberdashery, to make something with visual impact?
Well, denim is very much a country fabric anyway, so that's a good start. Yeah. So is gingham. And then it's fringe, isn't it?
It is fringe. Yes.
And you're kind of home free. And we saw some really lovely transformations.
Yeah. And those ones were with fringing, really, or a different type of fringing. We had Jill with her denim sort of around the bust with the frilly bits underneath, and that really sort of made that.
That was really pretty. She made a ruffle.
That's it, yes.
She made a ruffle underneath the bust line, and then she had 2 symmetrical big stars, which is really humorous, it's just light and fun.
And certainly, we've talked about this on stage, theatrical costumes, you don't necessarily need the detail, do you? Because people are a fair way back. But you've also got to think, well, because people are a fair way back, how do you make it visually exciting? Well, a bit of bling and the stars there, they'll catch the light and they'll go ping, 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 won't they?
Exactly. A bit of sparkle and a bit of swinging fringe.
Now, what do you think of Mani's fringe? Because I really liked her make, but they sort of slated it because she had the long jacket with the fringe. And to me, that was country, but they said, oh, the sleeves would be restricted. Well, I thought, well, if you're a singer, don't worry if you're not going to be playing the guitar on that, but if you're a singer, how visually exciting would that be with all the fringe?
Well, very. Very much so. Yeah, I liked her offering very much.
All
Yeah.
that gold fringing.
Yeah.
And then Christian, he had it as well with that sort of denim and that gold top with fringing. Just, yes, delightful, wasn't it?
Did Christian have the roses on with his?
I did, yeah. A little bit of,
To me, that was beautiful. It was matte, so it wasn't blingy and sparkly, but I think the color pop that he set up with the gold and the red, that was really effective. That was one of my favorites, actually.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
he's doing well. The standing for this round, Annie was 7th, Angela 6th, Magny 5th, Debra 4th, Christian 3rd. So he's still up the top there. Close, Brogan was 2nd, so she didn't get it again. But Jill, she's recovered and back up there with her sort of country star number. What they do in an hour and a half is quite amazing.
Well, and again, I think Jill does have that theatrical sense, you know, maybe not so much the natural engineer, and she has things to overcome physically, but I think she is a really interesting sewer because she has that visualize, she can see things.
And hopefully is now safe because she's won this transformation round. So we go into the last round seeing Angela and Magny in 5th and 6th, so in the bottom 3. But Jill was bottom in the first round, but because she'd come first in the transformation, hopefully she's out of the danger zone. But it's really between now Magny and Angela, really. But we go into this inspired round. We saw some fantastic material being used. So let's go back to our original chat for this episode, which was talking about fabric. We've got Christian using this, well, what do you call it? That cat suit outfit. That's stretchy, metallic.
Metallic lycra.
Oh.
Like a knit. Yes, beautiful. Beautiful
And
very, very impactful.
Wasn't it?
Mm.
And hard to work with. That's going to be a challenge to work with.
It is. But you have the advantage of being able to use a 4-spool overlock. I'm not sure if he constructed it that way, but you can thread up this machine and sew everything at once. You know, your seam end, you can finish it off. You know, cuts off what you don't want. But no, I thought he coped the fabric extremely well, and I like the asymmetry of the bodysuit. Yeah. And the cape was very dramatic.
I would love that.
And it brought up an interesting point about a pattern challenge, because you can measure someone's bust, waist, and hip and get the measurements right, but you don't always get the distribution of something right, or you're not going to notice a person standing sideways and say the level of their backside and what angle that takes. So he could have measured correctly, tried it on, and it was still looking okay. But then when you finish everything up and the garment becomes tightened up in the making, then he got that a little bit close around the bum. Now that's easy to explain, and he got a bad rap for that from Esme, who, you know, could have been explained, I think, a bit better, and we could have learned something there. And it's about looking at your client who's sideways instead of just front on, and just taking the basic measurements, because you don't know what proportion of your hip measurement is in the front and which proportion is in the back. So it's about distribution. So that was another thing we might talk about.
Yeah.
Sorry to rattle on. Sorry.
Brogan and her Let's Dance with that metallic brocade, you call it that? That was stunning material as well.
Beautiful fabric. It wasn't as striking as a stage garment, though. I thought it was. Indeed,
it was quite dark, wasn't it? You didn't catch. Well, I felt that you got glimmers of the blue or the magenta in it, but it was still quite a black, grey, dark way. It seemed that way, didn't it? The colour.
Yes, and then it needed much more of a contrast trim. It needed to. The fringe was lost.
Yes, I found that quite weird, because I thought that just seemed to me naturally, you know, we're talking about Bowie, most of the costumes are going to be eccentric over the top, aren't they, really? I just don't know where the thought process there. I thought the fringing would have naturally been longer. So I don't know what she was thinking about there. That's interesting.
Yeah, because the fringe didn't perform. I mean,
No.
even behind the neck, it didn't. So now we're looking at somebody who's a natural engineer.
Yeah.
And put anything together and almost see the steps,
Yeah.
from beginning to end. But visualizing something and capturing the importance of the performance. So it's going to be interesting, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Is it? Yes, because if I would have been in that position and I put my fringing on that I had pre-bought, which I presume they had, I would have gone, "Ooh, this is not." I think I would have naturally gone, "This is not big enough." And I don't know whether I would have gone into the haberdashery to have found some bigger stuff. But then we don't know if they're allowed to do that, do we?
Yeah, that's true. But I'm not sure what the process is all about, and if they have to use their sourced materials ahead of time. I don't know.
What did you think of Manny's jacket? That her idea of rebel with the jacket with was it lions and tigers on?
Yeah, that was confusing. That was, I didn't get that at all, because she had a full skirt with a big jacket, and it just looked like an ill-fitting something. If she would have had some very tight stretchy pants on with a lightning bolt in it on one leg, maybe that would have looked a bit more Bowie. But she certainly spent a lot of time on it. It was like, wow. I want to impress with my tailoring, rather than my stage.
Yeah.
So that was, and it had some. Her model had some thing on her forehead, which looked a bit spiritual to me.
Yeah, I presume that was from the inspiration side of things. I presume. And then we had Annie with the asymmetric blazer dress, which I didn't know, but I've seen it since online, was the same pattern piece as Serena last year when she had the silk and she interfaced it and it all bubbled up.
That's right. She used a fusible interfacing on a satinized cloth, and it all bubbled up. And this one done in the lame, the blue lame fabric, worked much better. So there you are. You choose a fabric which you don't have to interline. It's good. It has enough posture to tailor it. So I spotted that too. That I thought, wow, that's a stark example of what not to do.
Yeah, and I suppose it's very easy for us, well, for me, to talk about these fabrics. You've learned about these fabrics over years of experience, and that really is the only way to learn about fabrics, isn't it? It's by making them and going, oh, this fabric didn't like that, I'm not going to do that ever again.
Yes, and if you don't have the time and you have to tackle one of these garments, then you get more fabric than you need, and you just practice. And you give yourself those lessons, and you try things, and you really warm up to it, and learn how to control it.
We've got to finish because obviously we lost Angela. Angela went with needle cord. What's that like to work with?
It's fine. It's easy to work with. It's a supple fabric. So, but I liked her dress, and I thought it was just the wrong period. It was not of its time for David Bowie, but it would have fit in a different scenario, I thought, very well. And I really liked the layering of the braid and the needle cord and the black bib. I loved the visual effect. I mean, from far away, when that model was coming down the catwalk, that looked really delicious.
Popped, didn't it? Just
really did. I thought it was great. But I can see the conflict, against the others who had chosen very, bright, blingy fabrics or the design. There was only one place to put her in the ratings, and then unfortunately for her, because such a nice person and a very, very solid seamstress, the decision was easy at that point, wasn't it? Because she had come in the bottom of all the challenges. It just wasn't her week.
And then we finish with Jill, who had this Ziggy-inspired the blue with the sequins, and then the netting, the red and the yellow netting underneath to be the flames.
Yeah.
You could see her creative process going through there.
Absolutely.
And as you say, that we've talked about that, the engineer, but then maybe going off pattern because you're there in the process. And she's seeing this netting and it looks quite rigid, straight lines. And she's like, do I cut it? Do I not? Do I cut it?
It made it. Her outfit was terrific. It was just wonderful. Loved it. And she had the face paint as well, didn't she? With the lightning bolts. So, and it was really effective. It looked like flames. It was, I really like her work.
Would you, if you were in that position, would you have cut that netting to make it look?
Yes, I think that was the right thing.
Textured.
Yeah, instead of taking it out of the Mardi Gras look and making it edgy, rock and roll.
Absolutely.
And there you go. So that's another thing I really admire. Is she's not afraid to take a risk.
Yeah. And I think that's where you do see, and I can understand those processes from someone who is very good at following a pattern and making something, but then in being in that moment, that creative process of going, oh, I'll just do this. And that's where we see that in the transformation challenge, isn't it? We see different sewers excel there because they are good at draping and going, oh, what happens if I do this? Oh, I'm going to try a bit of that. And you see that creativity live in front of you.
Yes, and of course they're looking around the room and it's, oh, he's doing this. Oh, she's doing this. I need to do something else. This isn't exciting enough, or it isn't, it's not going to spark off the judges, so they make those quick-witted decisions and just take scissors to it and hope for the best. And
if you were going to, are you a transformation challenge person, or are you a pattern challenge person? Do you like that sort of transformation role of going, oh, I'm going to do a bit of this, I'm going to do a bit of that?
Yes, not so much. I think I like to know what I'm going to do. I take risks all the time as well, but I think I would enjoy the pattern challenge more than the transformation.
Yeah,
much more.
The transformation challenge would scare me, definitely.
I think if you're going to be a contestant on this show, you have to embrace that transformation. I think you have to do that. I would say that's one thing that, if you were going to consider going on that show, you'd have to practice with that and like the process of that.
Yeah. Well, we finished with Annie and that asymmetric blazer dress of the 80s getting garment of the week. And I can understand that it had the feathers around the back, didn't it, on the sleeves? We've talked about sewing those.
So for me, it was, for me, the feathers didn't hold up to what was going on.
You wanted more?
Much more, or a different color perhaps, or a larger boa, maybe a matching color, matching boa, and maybe 2 or 3 rows of it.
Yes.
It just got lost. It looked like an afterthought.
Yeah.
I like Debra's very much.
Yes, she is. I think she might be in my final 3.
Ah, mine too.
Yeah.
Mine too, yes, I'd have to say. Yeah, so she really brought that into a modern,
Yes, yeah, and those ostrich feathers. Oh.
Yes, and it was very well balanced, and the choice of brocade, and then she had the story.
Yeah, the ashes to ashes story. Yeah.
That sold it for me.
She's constantly been up there. She's a bit like Christian. She's constantly been up there, sometimes overlooked, just doing brilliant things, sometimes getting, saying that, she got Garment of the Week last week, didn't she, with her Mrs. Havisham? Has
she got Garment of the Week a few times, Debra?
Let's have a look, because my wonderful book here, it was Mrs. Havisham. She got it again, Garment of the Week in Summer Week. She's got it again. On week 1, Debra got Garment of the Week.
That's what I thought. Okay, so you see, she's handling that made to measure very, very well. So she could be the top contender.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, there we are. That's another week talked about. That's week 6. We have week 7 to go, and then it's 8 quarterfinal, 9 semi-final, and then 10 the final. 4 episodes.
Gone by. It's gone by fast.
Hope you've enjoyed that talk about fabrics. Just go for it. Try it. You don't know until you try. And as you rightly said, get enough.
get enough. Yeah, go to a remnant bin and pick out something you never would dream of sewing, or it's always look past. Buy it, practice with it.
Yeah, brilliant. So yeah, homework, everyone, and let us know how you get on in the comments below. As always, wonderful talking to you about it all, and we look forward to seeing you next week for Lingerie Week.
Oh, good. All right, that'll help me with my swimwear.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks, Carol. See you all.
Bye. See ya. Bye-bye.